They say your life can change in a single moment. For me, that moment came on a Tuesday night at the Velvet Rose, when I spilled wine on the wrong table and discovered that monsters are real, that I held the key to peace between two warring species, and that sometimes the person who saves you isn't quite human. My name is Amara Osei, and this is the story of how I went from being invisible to becoming the most important person in a war I didn't know existed. The Velvet Rose was supposed to be one of Seoul's most elegant restaurants. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, and a menu that cost more than my monthly rent. But for me, it was just another place where I was treated like I didn't matter. I'd been working there for 8 months, enduring the contempt of my manager Marcus Hale, a man who seemed to take genuine pleasure in making my life miserable. He had a particular talent for finding my weaknesses and exploiting them. My shyness, my fear of confrontation, my desperate need to keep this job because I had nothing else. Every shift was a test of how much humiliation I could swallow before I broke. That Tuesday started like any other nightmare. The dinner rush was in full swing, and I was juggling too many tables, because Marcus had sent 2 servers home early to save on labor costs. My hands were shaking as I carried a tray of wine glasses through the crowded dining room. I should have known better than to cut through the center aisle. But I was exhausted and not thinking clearly. That's when it happened. A woman's purse strap caught my ankle, and suddenly I was falling, the tray tilting, wine glasses sliding in what felt like slow motion. The crash was spectacular. Red wine splashed across white marble floors like blood at a crime scene. Glass shattered in a crystalline symphony that made every conversation in the restaurant stop dead. The silence that followed was worse than the crash. Every eye in the room turned to me. I could feel my face burning with shame as I dropped to my knees, trying desperately to gather the broken glass with my bare hands. That's when I heard Marcus's voice, low and venomous, cutting through the quiet like a blade. "Get up, now." His hand clamped around my upper arm with bruising force, and he started dragging me toward the kitchen. I stumbled, my feet barely keeping up with his aggressive pace. The other diners pretended not to notice, returning to their meals as if nothing was happening. That's what people do, isn't it? They look away from ugliness, from violence, from anything that might disturb their comfortable evening. But one person wasn't looking away. As Marcus hauled me past a corner table, I caught a glimpse of a man in a charcoal gray suit. He was impossibly handsome in that untouchable way some people are. With sharp cheekbones and eyes so dark they seemed to absorb light. He was watching us with an intensity that made my skin prickle. For just a moment, our eyes met, and I saw something there. Recognition, maybe or calculation. Then Marcus yanked me through the kitchen doors, and the moment was gone. The kitchen was chaos. Steam and heat and shouting chefs who barely glanced at us as Marcus dragged me toward the office in the back. I knew what was coming. This wasn't the first time he'd pulled me aside to berate me, to threaten my job, to make me feel small enough to disappear. But something felt different tonight. There was a rage in his grip that scared me more than usual. We were almost to the office door when the strangest thing happened. Every screen in the kitchen, every monitor and tablet and phone, suddenly flickered and changed. The security camera feeds that normally showed the dining room and entrances were replaced by something else. Footage of Marcus. Footage I'd never seen before. The first clip showed him in the walk-in freezer, shoving another server against the wall, his face twisted with anger. The second showed him pocketing cash from the register when he thought no one was looking. The third showed him in his office, making crude comments about female staff members to the assistant manager. Clip after clip, playing on every screen simultaneously, each one more damning than the last. The kitchen went silent. Everyone was staring at the screens, then at Marcus, then at me, as if I had somehow orchestrated this exposure. Marcus's hand dropped from my arm. His face had gone pale, then red, then pale again. Before he could speak, before he could spin some excuse or place blame, the kitchen doors swung open. The man in the gray suit walked in with the confidence of someone who owned the world. Behind him came 2 uniformed police officers. "Marcus Hale," the man said, his voice carrying an accent I couldn't quite place. "Eastern European maybe, cultured, and cold. You're under arrest for assault, theft, and workplace harassment." The security footage has been forwarded to the appropriate authorities, along with sworn statements from 17 current and former employees. I watched in stunned disbelief as the officers handcuffed Marcus and read him his rights. He was sputtering, trying to argue, but his voice sounded small and desperate now. As they let him out, the man in the gray suit turned to me. His dark eyes held mine with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. "Miss Osei," he said, and I was startled that he knew my name. "I apologize for the dramatic intervention, but some situations require a firm hand. You're safe now." Then he handed me a business card, smooth and black, with silver lettering, Eclipse Consortium, and below that, a single name, Dmitry Volkov. The next few hours were a blur. The restaurant closed early. Police took statements from staff. The other servers looked at me with a mixture of awe and suspicion, as if I'd somehow engineered the whole thing. I didn't know what to tell them. I didn't know what had happened myself. All I had was a black business card, and a growing certainty that my life had just turned in a direction I couldn't predict. When I finally made it home to my tiny apartment in Itaewon, I found an envelope waiting at my door. Inside was a formal letter on heavy cream paper. "Miss Osei," it began, "I would like to offer you a position as my executive assistant at Eclipse Consortium. The work is demanding but rewarding, and I believe you possess qualities that would make you invaluable to our organization. If you're interested, please meet me tomorrow at the address below." The salary listed at the bottom was more than triple what I'd been making at the Velvet Rose. I should have been suspicious. I should have questioned why a complete stranger would orchestrate Marcus's arrest and then offer me a job. But I was tired of being powerless, tired of being invisible, tired of accepting scraps because I was too afraid to reach for more. The next morning, I put on my best interview clothes and took the subway to Gangnam. The address led me to a sleek glass tower that stretched toward the sky like a blade. The lobby was all marble and chrome, intimidatingly modern. I gave my name to the receptionist, and within minutes, I was being escorted to the top floor. Dmitry Volkov's office was massive, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Seoul. He stood with his back to me, hands clasped behind him, looking out at the city below. When he turned, I was struck again by how striking he was. In the harsh light of day, there was something almost unreal about his beauty. His skin was too pale, too perfect, his movements too fluid. "Miss Osei," he said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "Thank you for coming. Please, sit. We have much to discuss." I sat, gripping my purse in my lap to keep my hands from shaking. He settled into his own chair, with that same unsettling grace, and regarded me with dark, unreadable eyes. "I imagine you have questions," he said. "Why did I help you? Why am I offering you this position? What does Eclipse Consortium actually do?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. He smiled slightly. "The answers are complicated, but I'll try to be direct. Eclipse Consortium is a private organization that facilitates negotiations between parties that cannot openly acknowledge each other's existence. We handle matters of international security, diplomatic crises, and conflicts that governments prefer to keep hidden. As for why I helped you, I've been monitoring Marcus Hale for some time. He was a bad man who hurt vulnerable people. You gave me the opportunity to remove him from circulation." That didn't really answer my question. But before I could press further, there was a knock at the door. A woman entered, tall and elegant, in a white lab coat, carrying a leather portfolio. "This is Dr. Sienna Park," Dmitry said. "She heads our research division. She'll be working closely with you if you accept this position." Dr. Park gave me a warm smile and took the seat beside me. "We were just discussing the nature of Amara's potential role," Dmitry told her. Dr. Park nodded. "I'm excited about the possibility of your involvement," she said to me. "Your perspective would be invaluable to our current project. It's quite groundbreaking work." I was about to ask what kind of project, when I noticed something odd. There was a paper on the edge of Dmitry's desk, and when I reached to move my purse, my hand brushed against it. The paper's edge was sharp, sharper than it should have been, and it sliced my fingertip. A small cut, barely anything, but enough to draw a bead of blood. I pulled my hand back with a gasp, and that's when everything changed. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Doctor Park inhaled sharply and turned her face away. And Dimitri? Dimitri went completely still, his eyes fixed on my bleeding finger with an intensity that was almost predatory. For a moment, just a heartbeat, I saw his pupils dilate until his eyes were almost black, saw something shift in his expression that was definitely not human. Then he blinked, and whatever I'd seen was gone, replaced by careful control. Dr. Park, he said quietly, please take Miss Osei to the medical bay and attend to her injury. His voice was strained, as if he was forcing the words out. Dr. Park stood quickly and gestured for me to follow her. As we left the office, I glanced back and saw Dimitri still sitting motionless, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair so tightly his knuckles were white. What just happened? I asked Dr. Park, as she led me down a pristine white hallway. She didn't answer immediately, just guided me into what looked like a high-tech medical facility, all gleaming equipment and monitors. Sit, she said gently, indicating an examination table. We need to talk, Amara. We need to tell you the truth about what Eclipse Consortium really does, and what Dimitri really is. She cleaned my cut with practiced efficiency, then pulled up a chair and looked at me with serious eyes. What I'm about to tell you will sound impossible, she said. But I need you to listen with an open mind, because your life, and possibly the lives of millions of people, may depend on your understanding. I nodded slowly, my heart starting to pound. Dr. Park took a deep breath. Vampires are real, Amara. They've existed alongside humans for thousands of years, hidden in plain sight, feeding on us, fearing us, fighting us in secret wars that never make the history books. And Dmitry Volkov is one of them. In fact, he's their king. I should have laughed. I should have stood up and walked out. But something in her expression, something in the memory of Dimitri's reaction to my blood, made me stay seated. She continued. For the last 5 years, Dimitri has been working to broker a peace treaty between vampires and humans. It's called the Crimson Accord, and if successful, it would be the first official recognition of vampire existence and the establishment of legal frameworks for coexistence. But there are problems. Vampire hunger is powerful, instinctual, difficult to control. Many vampires don't want peace. They've lived as apex predators for so long they can't imagine any other existence. And on the human side, there's fear, hatred, religious opposition. The treaty has stalled because neither side trusts the other enough to make the necessary concessions. I found my voice. What does this have to do with me? Dr. Park leaned forward. When you cut yourself just now, did you notice Dimitri's reaction? I nodded. That's because your blood is different, Amara. Incredibly different. Most human blood triggers an intense feeding response in vampires. It's biochemical, almost impossible to resist. But your blood, it does the opposite. When vampires smell it, their hunger disappears, completely. We've never seen anything like it. I stared at her. That's impossible. She shook her head. We've been searching for someone like you for 3 years. We'd almost given up hope. But then, our surveillance systems flagged your manager's activities. And when Dimitri went to intervene, he caught your scent. He knew immediately that you were special. Before I could process this, the door opened, and Dimitri entered. He'd composed himself, but there was still tension in his shoulders. I apologize for my reaction, he said. I should have been more prepared. But your blood's effect is quite powerful. He moved to stand beside Dr. Park, and now I could see him differently. The too pale skin, the too perfect features, the way he moved like liquid shadow. How long? I asked. How long have you been a vampire? 347 years, he said calmly. I was turned during the reign of Peter the Great in Russia. I've seen empires rise and fall, watched humanity evolve and grow and make the same mistakes again and again. And now I'm trying to do something that's never been done before. I'm trying to end a war that's lasted since the dawn of civilization. Why? I asked. Why do you care about peace? He was quiet for a moment. Because I'm tired, Amara. Tired of hiding, tired of killing, tired of watching my people become monsters, and your people become victims. There's a better way, if we're brave enough to take it. He gestured to my bandaged finger. Your blood could be the key. If we can understand what makes it unique, we might be able to synthesize it, create a treatment that allows vampires to control their hunger. Imagine it. Vampires walking freely among humans. No longer slaves to their instincts. No more secret murders. No more disappearances in the night. Just coexistence. Peace. I looked between them, these two people telling me an impossible story that somehow felt true. What do you want from me? Dr. Park answered. We'd like your permission to study your blood, to understand what makes it unique, to see if we can replicate its properties. The work would take months, maybe years, but if successful, it could change everything. Dmitri added, you would be compensated generously and protected absolutely. The moment word spreads about what you are, you'll become the most valuable person in the world to some, and the most dangerous threat to others. There are vampire factions that want this treaty to fail. They would kill you without hesitation to preserve their way of life. I should have run. Every rational instinct told me to get up and leave, and forget this conversation ever happened. But I thought about my life at the Velvet Rose. About being invisible, powerless, trapped in endless cycles of abuse and submission. About watching Marcus hurt people and feeling helpless to stop it. And I thought about what Dmitri was offering. Not just a job or money, but purpose. The chance to matter. To be part of something bigger than my own small, frightened existence. I looked at Dmitri. If I do this, if I help you, you have to promise me something. He raised an eyebrow. I need complete transparency. No lies, no manipulation, no hidden agendas. If this is going to work, I need to trust you, and you need to treat me like a partner, not a resource. Agreed, he said without hesitation. Then I'm in. The next 3 months were the strangest of my life. I moved into a secure apartment within Eclipse Consortium's headquarters, a sleek modern space with reinforced windows and 24-hour security. Every other day, I met with Dr. Park and her research team, giving blood samples and undergoing tests that seemed more like science fiction than medicine. They measured everything: hormone levels, protein structures, genetic markers, cellular composition, and slowly, they began to understand what made me different. It wasn't magic or divine intervention. It was biology. My blood contained an extremely rare protein, they designated Amara Osei, which somehow bonded with and neutralized the enzyme in vampire saliva that triggered their feeding frenzy. In simple terms, my blood turned off their hunger switch. But understanding the mechanism and replicating it were two very different challenges. Dr. Park's team worked around the clock, trying to synthesize Amara 7 inches a lab. Meanwhile, I was learning about the vampire world I'd stumbled into. Dmitri spent hours educating me about vampire history, politics, and culture. I learned that vampires weren't undead corpses or soulless demons. They were a separate species that had evolved alongside humans. Similar in many ways but fundamentally different in their need for blood to survive. Most vampires lived hidden among humans, carefully managing their feeding to avoid detection. They had jobs, families, lives that looked normal on the surface. But underneath was always the hunger, the constant struggle to control instincts that demanded violence. Dmitri himself was fascinating. As the vampire king, he led a council of elders, who governed their species in secret. He'd seen so much history, witnessed so much change, that his perspective on humanity was both compassionate and weary. He told me about the wars between vampires and humans, the massacres on both sides, the centuries of fear and hatred, and he told me about the faction that opposed him most violently. The Shadow Covenant, a group of traditionalist vampires who believed peace with humans was betrayal of their nature. They wanted to maintain the old ways, the hunting and hiding, the predator-prey relationship that had defined their existence for millennia. And they would do anything to stop the Crimson Accord from succeeding. 4 months into my time at Eclipse Consortium, Dr. Park made a breakthrough. She'd successfully synthesized a stable version of Amara 7. The serum, as they called it, could theoretically be injected into a vampire to suppress their feeding instinct for up to 72 hours. But it was untested, and testing it required a volunteer willing to risk unknown side effects. Several vampires from Dimitri's council agreed to participate in controlled trials. I watched through observation glass as they received injections, then were exposed to fresh human blood. The results were remarkable. Not one of them showed the typical feeding response. Their pupils didn't dilate, their fangs didn't extend, their bodies didn't tense with predatory focus. They simply looked at the blood with the same mild interest anyone might show toward an ordinary liquid. The implications were staggering. If the serum worked as well in field conditions as it did in the lab, vampires could finally have a choice. They could walk among humans without constant fear of losing control. They could build relationships, hold jobs, live openly, without hiding their nature. It was everything Dimitri had hoped for. But it was also the thing the Shadow Covenant feared most. Because if vampires didn't need to hunt, didn't need to hide, didn't need to be monsters, what did that make them? Just people. And some vampires didn't want to be just people. They wanted to be apex predators, superior beings who ruled the night. Peace threatened their identity, their power, their entire worldview. The threat started soon after Dr. Park published her initial findings to Dimitri's council, encrypted messages warning me to stop the research. Surveillance photos of me leaving the building, my apartment window, even from inside supposedly secure areas of Eclipse Consortium. Someone was watching me closely, and they wanted me to know it. Dimitri increased my security detail, assigned me bodyguards who never left my side. But we all knew the truth. If the Shadow Covenant wanted me dead badly enough, they would find a way. Vampires were patient, cunning, and they'd spent centuries perfecting the art of assassination. The attack came on a Tuesday evening, exactly 6 months after that first night at the Velvet Rose. I was working late in Dr. Park's lab, reviewing test results, when the lights went out, not just in the lab, but in the entire building. Emergency generators should have kicked in immediately, but they didn't. In the sudden darkness, I heard screams from somewhere below, the sound of breaking glass, and worst of all, a silence that felt predatory. My bodyguards moved immediately, flanking me, weapons drawn, but they didn't even have time to shout a warning before shapes moved in the darkness, impossibly fast, and suddenly I was alone. My guards were gone, not dead, I realized. Just gone. Pulled into the shadows so quickly I hadn't even seen it happen. I ran. It was instinct, pure and simple. I burst through the lab doors and sprinted down the hallway, my footsteps echoing in the emergency lighting that had finally flickered on. Behind me, I could hear them. Footsteps that weren't footsteps. Whispers that weren't quite words. The sound of predators closing in on prey. I made it to the stairwell and started climbing, knowing it was useless but unable to stop. Behind me, a voice called out, soft and amused. Amara Osei, the woman who would destroy us all. Do you have any idea how many of our kind would thank me for killing you? I recognized that voice, from intelligence briefings. Cassius Drake. Second in command of the Shadow Covenant, and a vampire who'd orchestrated some of the bloodiest conflicts in vampire history. I burst through a door onto the roof, cold night air hitting my face like a slap. The Seoul skyline stretched out in every direction, lights glittering like stars. Beautiful, and completely useless as an escape route. I spun around as Cassius emerged from the stairwell, moving with that fluid grace all vampires had. He wasn't alone. 6 other vampires fanned out behind him, blocking any path back inside. Cassius smiled, revealing fangs. You've been quite the problem, he said conversationally. Dimitri's little pet human, promising a future where we become sheep like the rest of you. Did you really think we'd let that happen? I backed up until I hit the roof's edge. No more room to run. Cassius approached slowly, savoring the moment. Your blood is remarkable, I'll give you that. But you're not the only one with rare genetics. You're just the first we've found. Once you're dead, we'll make sure no one looks for others. The Crimson Accord dies with you tonight. He was 3 steps away when I heard it. The sound of something massive hitting the rooftop behind me. I turned and saw Dimitri landing in a crouch, his eyes blazing with rage I'd never seen before. He'd jumped from another building, crossed 50 feet of empty air to reach this rooftop, and now he stood between me and Cassius like vengeance incarnate. What followed was violence unlike anything I'd ever witnessed. Vampires moved too fast for human eyes to track properly, their fight a blur of superhuman speed and strength. Dmitri fought with centuries of combat experience, every movement precise and lethal. But Cassius and his allies were skilled too, and they had numbers on their side. The rooftop became a battlefield, and I was caught in the middle of it, dodging blows that would have killed me instantly. I tried to help, tried to do something, but I was hopelessly outmatched. Then, I saw it. Dr. Park's emergency kit, knocked from someone's belt during the fight, sliding across the rooftop toward me. Inside would be medical supplies. And if I was lucky, maybe a sample of the serum. I lunged for the kit, as a vampire came at me from the side. My fingers closed around it just as he reached me, his hand grabbing my shoulder with crushing force. I spun, acting on pure instinct, and jammed the syringe I'd grabbed from the kit straight into his neck. He screamed, a sound of rage and shock, and released me, staggering backward. For a moment, nothing happened. Then his expression changed. The rage faded, replaced by confusion, then horror. He looked at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. "What did you do to me?" he whispered. "The hunger. It's gone. I can't feel it anymore." The fighting stopped. Every vampire on that rooftop had frozen, staring at the one I'd injected. Cassius looked between him and me, understanding dawning in his eyes. "The serum," he said. "You gave him the serum." The vampire I'd injected was breathing hard, his expression a mixture of wonder and fear. "I can think clearly," he said. "For the first time in 200 years, the hunger isn't screaming in my mind. I can just think." Cassius's face twisted with fury. "You see what they want to do to us? Turn us into humans. Strip away everything that makes us strong." He moved toward me again. But Dmitri intercepted him, and their fight resumed with even greater intensity. What happened next is hard to describe. Police sirens in the distance, growing closer, helicopters with searchlights sweeping across the skyline. Eclipse Consortium security forces storming the rooftop in tactical gear. The vampires of the Shadow Covenant realized they were surrounded, and made a choice. Most fled, disappearing over the edge of the roof and into the night. But Cassius stayed, fighting Dmitri with desperate fury, until finally Dmitri overpowered him, forcing him to his knees. Cassius looked up at me with pure hatred. "This isn't over," he spat. "You've started something you can't stop." Then security tranquilized him, and he went limp. The aftermath was chaos. Medical teams treating the injured, security sweeping the building, police arriving with questions we couldn't answer, and me, sitting on the rooftop with a blanket around my shoulders, trying to process what had just happened. Dmitri sat beside me, his usual composure shattered. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I promised to protect you, and I failed." I shook my head. "You saved my life." But he wasn't listening. "This proves what I've always feared. Peace will only come at a terrible price. Maybe some wars aren't meant to end." I thought about the vampire I'd injected with the serum, about the wonder in his voice when he realized his hunger was gone, about what that freedom might mean for others like him. "No," I said firmly. "This proves we're on the right track. The Shadow Covenant is terrified because they know the serum works. They know if we succeed, they lose everything they've built their identity on. But that just means we have to succeed. We have to finish this." Dmitri looked at me with something like admiration. "You're braver than I gave you credit for." I smiled weakly. "I'm terrified, but I'm also angry, and I'm tired of powerful people deciding who gets to live free and who doesn't. If I can help change that, then almost dying tonight was worth it." But keeping my involvement secret was no longer possible. Security camera footage from the attack had leaked to the media. Within hours, my face was everywhere. News outlets around the world running stories about the woman whose blood could end the vampire threat. Conspiracy theorists claiming I was part of a government experiment. Religious groups calling me either a miracle or an abomination. And worst of all, my address, my background, every detail of my life laid bare for millions to scrutinize. I became the most famous person in the world overnight, and I hadn't wanted any of it. Dmitri called an emergency meeting of his council, 20 vampire elders from across the globe. gathering in Eclipse Consortium's conference room to decide the future of their species. I sat at the COS table beside Dimitri, the only human in a room full of predators, and felt their eyes on me with a mixture of curiosity, resentment, and hope. Dimitri stood and addressed them. The attack on Miss Osei proves that the Shadow Covenant will stop at nothing to prevent the Crimson Accord from succeeding. We can continue to work in secret, hoping to build support before going public, or we can accelerate our timeline. Present the serum and the treaty to the United Nations. Force both species to confront this issue directly. It's a risk, but hiding hasn't kept us safe. Perhaps transparency will. The debate that followed was intense. Some elders argued for caution, fearing human backlash if vampire existence was confirmed. Others wanted to move forward immediately, believing the serum gave them leverage they'd never had before. And a few questioned whether peace was even desirable, whether they should return to the old ways of secrecy and predation. Through it all, I listened and learned. These weren't monsters debating evil. They were people, trying to navigate an impossible situation with no good options. Finally, Dimitri called for a vote. The motion to present the Crimson Accord to the United Nations passed by a narrow margin. In 2 weeks, the world would learn that vampires were real. Those 2 weeks were a nightmare of preparation. Dimitri worked with diplomatic contacts to arrange an emergency UN session. Dr. Park prepared presentations on the serum's development and effects. And I practiced a speech I never thought I'd have to give, trying to find words that could bridge centuries of fear and hatred. The media frenzy intensified. Protesters gathered outside Eclipse Consortium's building, some supporting us, others carrying signs calling for my death. I received thousands of messages daily, everything from marriage proposals to detailed death threats. Security teams swept my apartment 3 times a day for bombs. I couldn't go anywhere without a dozen bodyguards. This was what it meant to be the key to peace, I realized. To be simultaneously the most protected and most targeted person alive. The day of the UN presentation arrived cold and gray, rain falling on New York City like tears. Dimitri and I sat in a secure motorcade, surrounded by security vehicles, as we drove through streets lined with protesters. Some held signs supporting vampire rights, others called for extermination. Most just looked scared, and I couldn't blame them. Their reality had shattered. Monsters were real, and now they had to decide whether those monsters deserved to exist. Inside the UN building, the atmosphere was tense. Delegates from every nation filled the assembly hall, whispering urgently to each other. Security was overwhelming, everyone aware that this session could end in violence. When Dimitri stood to speak, the room went silent. He looked out at the assembled nations and began. 347 years ago, I was turned into a vampire, against my will. I've spent centuries hiding what I am, feeding on humans to survive, living in the shadows because sunlight would destroy me. I've killed people, many people. More than I can count, more than I can bear to remember. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness for those crimes. I'm here to ask for something harder. The chance to stop committing them. He paused, letting that sink in. Vampires exist, we always have. We've been your myths, your nightmares, your cautionary tales. But we're also just people trying to survive in a world that wants us dead. The Crimson Accord offers us both a way forward. Legal recognition for vampires in exchange for strict regulations on feeding. A serum that can suppress our predatory instincts. Integration instead of extermination. Peace instead of endless war. Then it was my turn. I stood on shaking legs and approached the podium, looking out at faces from every nation, every culture, every background. I thought about that night at the Velvet Rose, about being invisible and powerless. And I thought about how far I'd come, how much I'd learned, how much I'd changed. My name is Amara Osei, I began. 6 months ago, I was a waitress at a restaurant in Seoul. I was nobody special, nobody important. I lived in fear, accepted abuse, and convinced myself that this was all I deserved. Then I discovered that my blood has a unique property that can help vampires control their hunger. And suddenly I mattered. Suddenly I was important. Suddenly people wanted to kill me or save me or use me. I paused, gathering courage. I'm not going to stand here and tell you that vampires are misunderstood victims. They're not. They've killed millions of humans over the centuries. But I'm also not going to tell you that they're irredeemable monsters. Because I've met them now. I've worked with them. Learned from them. Seen their fear and hope and desire for something better. They're people. Dangerous people, yes. People who need strict oversight and consequences for violence, absolutely. But still, people. And if there's a way to end this war without genocide on either side, don't we have an obligation to try? The room erupted. Some delegates applauded. Others shouted objections. Dmitri returned to the podium and presented Dr. Park's research, explaining the science behind the serum in terms anyone could understand. Then came the testimonials. Vampires from Dimitri's council speaking about their experiences with the serum, describing the relief of freedom from constant hunger. Human volunteers who'd worked with peaceful vampires, attesting to the possibility of coexistence. And finally, a video message from the vampire I'd accidentally injected on that rooftop. He spoke haltingly, still adjusting to his new mental clarity. Before the serum, he said, every moment was a battle. The hunger was always there, always demanding to be fed. I hurt people because I couldn't help it. I became a monster because I had no choice. But now I have a choice. And I choose to be better. I choose peace. The vote was scheduled for 1 week later, giving nations time to consult with their governments and citizens. That week was agony. Polls showed public opinion divided almost exactly down the middle. Some countries signaled they would support the Crimson Accord. Others promised to vote against it. Many remained undecided, swayed by daily protests and shifting public sentiment. Dmitri and I did countless interviews, answered endless questions, faced hostile reporters who tried to trap us in contradictions. Through it all, we presented the same message. This isn't about trusting vampires. It's about creating systems that make trust possible. Accountability, transparency, consequences for violation. A path forward that doesn't require either species to disappear. The Shadow Covenant made one final attempt to stop us. A coordinated series of attacks in major cities around the world. Vampires killing humans in public, theatrical violence designed to prove that coexistence was impossible. But the attacks backfired. Because vampires from Dimitri's council worked alongside human law enforcement to stop them. Vampires saving humans from other vampires, proving that the division wasn't species against species but philosophy against philosophy. Those who wanted peace versus those who wanted war. By the time the UN vote arrived, public sentiment had shifted slightly in our favor. Slightly, not much, but maybe enough. I watched the vote from the gallery, Dmitri beside me, both of us barely breathing. One by one, nations cast their votes. Yes, no, abstain. The count was agonizingly close. When the final tally was announced, the Crimson Accord passed by a margin of just 17 votes. Not a mandate, but enough. Legal frameworks would be established for vampire registration, feeding regulations, and serum distribution. Vampires who complied would receive legal protection and rights. Those who refused would face criminal prosecution. It wasn't perfect. It would take years to implement fully. But it was a start. For the first time in human history, vampires and humans had officially agreed to try coexistence. 1 year later, I stood in a completely renovated building that used to be the Velvet Rose. It had been transformed into Horizon Haven, a community center dedicated to vampire-human relations. The grand opening celebration was packed with people from both species, mingling cautiously but genuinely. I watched a vampire mother chatting with a human father about their children's schools. Saw a mixed group of teenagers laughing together. Noticed elderly humans and ancient vampires sharing stories about the past. It wasn't perfect. There were still incidents, still violence, still extremists on both sides trying to undermine the peace. But things were getting better. Slowly but measurably. Dmitri found me by the windows, where artificial UV lights simulated safe sunlight. For the vampire attendees. This is what you fought for, I said. He smiled. This is what we fought for. I couldn't have done it without you. I thought about everything that had changed. The waitress who'd been invisible now advised the UN on vampire integration policies. The vampire king who'd ruled in shadows had stepped down, allowing a democratic council to govern his people. The hatred that had defined centuries was being slowly, painfully replaced by understanding. It's strange, I said. A year ago, I was nobody. Now, I'm going to spend the rest of my life as the woman who bridged two species. No pressure, right? Dmitri laughed, a sound I'd rarely heard from him. You're handling it remarkably well. What will you do next? I've been thinking about that. There's so much work still to do. Other countries implementing the accord, training programs for integration, conflict resolution, when things go wrong. But also, I think I'd like to travel. See how this is playing out in different parts of the world. Maybe write about it. Help people understand what we've built here. He nodded thoughtfully. I'd like to join you. If you'll have me. I need to learn how to be something other than a king. Maybe you could help me figure that out. I looked at him, this ancient vampire, who'd risked everything for peace, and felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the artificial sunlight. I'd like that, I said. The music started, a blend of traditional Korean instruments, and something classical I didn't recognize. Couples began moving to the center of the room, human and vampire dancing together. Dmitri offered his hand. May I? I took it, and we joined them, moving among people who'd been enemies just a year ago, and were now, tentatively, hopefully, becoming something else, something better. As we danced, I thought about that night at the Velvet Rose, about being dragged toward the kitchen by Marcus, feeling small and powerless and broken, about the man in the gray suit who'd intervened, not knowing that single action would change everything. Sometimes I still couldn't believe this was my life, that I mattered now, that I'd helped change the world. But here I was, dancing with a vampire king at a celebration of peace I'd helped create, in a building that used to represent my oppression, and now represented hope. If that wasn't proof that anyone could make a difference, that the powerless could become powerful, that the invisible could be seen, I didn't know what was. The song ended, and Dmitri and I stepped apart. Around us, the party continued, humans and vampires, building something new together. It would be hard. There would be setbacks and violence, and moments when it seemed like peace was impossible, but we'd proven it wasn't. We'd proven that even the oldest hatreds could be overcome, that even the most dangerous monsters could choose to be something else, that even the most powerless person could change the world if they found the courage to try. My name is Amara Osei. I used to be invisible. Now I'm the woman who helped end a war that lasted millennia. And this is just the beginning. Because peace isn't something you achieve once and forget. It's something you build every day, with every choice, with every act of understanding and courage. The Crimson Accord gave us the framework, but living it, making it real, turning enemies into neighbors and neighbors into friends, that's the work of generations. And I intend to spend the rest of my life doing exactly that. Living in the light, no longer invisible, no longer powerless, finally free.